The envelope arrived on a Tuesday, which was the same day of the week it had always been, the day Conrad Hale set aside for things that did not require immediate decisions. His office on the 14th floor of a building most people passed without looking at occupied the corner facing east, and in the mornings the light came in flat and without apology across a desk that held very little. A phone, a legal pad, a coffee that was always black and always half-finished by the time his assistant knocked. He did not own the building. He owned the two beside it as well, but that was not something the building knew, and Conrad had never seen the point in telling it. He was 53 years old, and he dressed the way men dress when they have stopped needing to prove anything to anyone in a room. His suits were not cheap, but they were not new, and he wore them with the particular ease of someone who had long ago decided that the way he looked was not the argument he was making. He drove a 10-year-old Volvo that his assistant had offered 3 times to replace and that he had kept for reasons he did not explain. The envelope had no return address, but he recognized the handwriting before he turned it over. He had not seen that handwriting in 11 years. His assistant, a methodical woman named Bev, who had been with him for 8 of those 11 years, set it on the desk with the morning mail without comment. She had learned early that Conrad was not a man who needed things pointed out to him. He noticed everything. He simply chose, with a consistency that she had come to find reassuring, not to react to most of it. He opened the envelope with the same letter opener he had used for 20 years, a plain steel thing his father had left him, and he read the card inside without expression. It was an invitation to a retirement gala. The gala was for Walter Aldrich. The name belonged to a man Conrad had worked under for 4 years, at the beginning of his career. A man who had been his first real employer, and who had, on a Wednesday afternoon in March 11 years ago, called Conrad into his office and explained in the measured tone of a man who believed himself to be doing a kindness that the firm was restructuring, that certain positions were being reconsidered, and that Conrad's particular way of operating, careful, unhurried, unwilling to perform urgency for the benefit of a room, did not fit the direction the firm was moving. He had said it without cruelty, Walter Aldrich. He had said it the way people say things they have already decided, with a gentleness that was really just the clean side of a sharp thing. Inside the invitation, beneath the printed card, there was a handwritten note on a smaller piece of paper folded once. The note was not from Walter Aldrich. It was from his daughter. Her name was Cecily Aldrich, and 11 years ago she had been engaged to Conrad Hale, and she had not been in the room when her father delivered the news, but she had been in the lobby 2 floors below, and she had known what the meeting was, and she had not told him. The note read, "My father's last night in the industry. I thought you should be there to see what you walked away from. Come, if you have the courage." She had not signed it either. She had not needed to. Conrad read it twice. Then he set it down on the desk with the same flat motion he used for documents he had already decided about, and he picked up his coffee, and he drank what was left of it, and he looked at the east-facing window for a long time. His operations director came in at 10:30. His name was Tom Briggs, a former naval officer, who had joined Conrad's firm in its 3rd year, and who had the particular quality of a man who knew the difference between a problem and a situation. He set a folder on the desk, looked at the 2 pieces of paper lying beside the letter opener, and said nothing about them. Conrad said, "You recognize the name Aldrich?" It was not a question. Tom had done his homework before joining. He knew the early history. Walter Aldrich, Tom said. Strategic Consulting, old firm. The one that— "Yes," Conrad said. Tom waited. "His daughter has invited me to his retirement gala." Conrad turned the smaller note around on the desk and pushed it toward Tom with one finger. "Read it." Tom read it. He set it back down. "She thinks you're still the man she knew 11 years ago," he said. "She thinks I'm still the man her father let go 11 years ago," Conrad said. "Which is the same thing in her version. What are you going to do?" Conrad stood and crossed to the window. 14 floors below, the city moved with its ordinary indifference, taxis and pedestrians, and the particular noise of a place that has never once stopped to consider any single person in it. He thought about Cecily Aldrich. He thought about the way she had looked in the lobby that Wednesday, how she had been standing near the elevator, with her coat already on, and how she had not quite met his eyes when he came out, and how he had understood in that moment, with the clean certainty of a man who has just been told the truth by someone who thought they were telling him something else, that she had known, that she had been there not to find out but to watch. He thought about the years since. He had not spent them thinking about her, not in any sustained way. There had been work and more work, and the particular quiet satisfaction of building something that no one had handed to him and no one could take away. And somewhere along the way the question of Cecily Aldridge had become the kind of question a man stops asking, not because it hurts, but because it no longer seems to require an answer. And then she had sent him a note. "I'm going to go," he said. Tom did not react the way most people would have. He said, "The Gala is black tie, 400 people. Aldridge's entire professional network. I know. His firm was acquired 2 years ago. The acquiring company is..." "Ours," Conrad said. There was a pause. "Among others," Tom said carefully. "The majority partner," Conrad said, "which Walter Aldridge does not know, because the acquisition was structured through a holding company, and the holding company's parent is not a name anyone in his circle would connect to a man he let go 11 years ago." He looked out at the city for another moment. "He's retiring into a firm that I own. He does not know this. His daughter does not know this. She sent me a note on heavier paper than the invitation asking me to come and watch what I walked away from." Tom was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How do you want to go in?" Conrad said, "No announcement, no table reserved under my name. I want to arrive the same way I arrive anywhere else. And if someone recognizes you, then someone recognizes me. The board members from Halcyon will be there. Stratton, Kellerman, they know your face. I know, they will say something." "Yes." Conrad turned from the window. His expression had not changed, but something behind it had come to rest, the way water comes to rest after it finds its level. "That's the point, Tom. I'm not going to say a word. I don't need to. But I need to be in that room when Cecily Aldridge realizes that the story she's been telling about me for 11 years has a different ending than the one she wrote." Tom picked up the note from the desk and looked at the handwriting one more time. He set it back down slowly. "1 car," he said. "No advance team. You walk in like a guest." "Like a guest," Conrad agreed. "Because that's what I am. She invited me." After Tom left, Conrad stood alone at the desk for a while. He opened the bottom drawer and took out a small flat notebook bound in dark green cloth, the corners pressed soft from years of being opened and closed. He had carried it in one form or another since he was 30 years old. Inside it he kept nothing that could not be said in a single sentence, and there were pages of such sentences, dated and spare. The record of a man who thought before he spoke, and who had learned very early that the things he did not say accumulated interest. He opened it to a clean page and wrote a single date in small, level handwriting. Then he put it in his jacket pocket and went back to work. The gala was held on a Friday evening in one of the older event spaces downtown, the kind of room that had been important once and had kept its chandeliers as evidence. 400 chairs had been arranged around circular tables dressed in white, and at the front of the room a low stage held a podium and a projected photograph of Walter Aldridge in his prime, square-shouldered and certain, the expression of a man who had spent 40 years being told his instincts were correct. Cecily Aldridge had spent 3 months organizing it. She was 41 now, and she moved through the early arrival hour with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had learned to manage large gatherings by watching her father manage them. She wore a black gown and the particular composure that comes from having every detail under control, from the centerpieces to the seating chart to the order of the evening's remarks. She had not mentioned the note to her husband. His name was Preston Ware, and he was a partner at a law firm that had represented the Aldridge name for 20 years. And he was the kind of man who wore his reliability the way other men wear good watches, visibly, with the confidence of something proven. He had listened to Cecily's version of her early history with the patience of a man who had married a woman with a complicated past and decided that the past was the past and the woman was worth the complication. He had heard, over the years and in various registers of her voice, about Conrad Hale. He had heard about a man who had been content with smallness, who had mistaken patience for strategy and stillness for depth, and who had ultimately been let go from his position because the firm had seen what Cecily had already known, that he would never push hard enough to matter. She had told this story at dinners. She had told it in the offhand way of people who have carried a version of the past so long it has become furniture. Something you stop seeing because it has always been there. Preston had kissed her forehead and never asked the man's last name. He asked it now, crossing the room toward her at 6:45, because one of the Aldridge firm's oldest clients, a man named Gerald Sutton, who was 80 years old and had the memory of someone 30 years younger. Conrad stopped reading his own draft in his mind and returned to the room. He had arrived at 6:55. He had come alone, had given his name at the door without elaboration, and had been directed to a table near the middle of the room by a young man with a clipboard who had not looked up long enough to register anything about him. He had taken his seat, ordered water, and watched the room fill. He knew several people at the surrounding tables. 3 of them were members of boards on which he also sat. One was the CFO of a company his firm had advised through a restructuring 2 years ago. None of them had placed him yet. He was in the category of faces that people recognize as familiar without being able to say why, and he had learned long ago that this category was, in its own way, a form of protection. He was watching the front of the room when he saw Cecily. She was moving between tables with the practiced ease of someone for whom a crowded room had never presented difficulty, and she was smiling the smile of a woman who had spent 3 months ensuring that this evening would go exactly as planned. She looked, he thought, the same as he remembered her, and not the same at all, the way places look when you return to them after a long time, familiar in shape but different in all the ways that actually matter. She had not seen him yet. Walter Aldridge arrived at 7 sharp, moving through the room with the slow, deliberate confidence of a man accepting an honor he has always known was coming. He was 70 now, and he moved like 70, but he wore it the way tall men wear age, as an endorsement rather than a diminishment. He shook hands around the nearest tables and accepted the applause of people who had worked with him and for him, and occasionally around him for 4 decades. He did not see Conrad. Conrad did not expect him to. The program began at 7:30. There were remarks from 2 former colleagues and a video tribute assembled from photographs and short statements. The room was warm and attentive. The kind of evening, Conrad thought, that measures itself in how many people stay until the end. He was on his 2nd glass of water when he heard the name. One of the board members from Halcyon Capital was 3 tables away. His name was Robert Kellerman, and he had the voice of a man who had been the loudest person in every room for 60 years and had never been corrected about it. He was leaning toward the man beside him, and Conrad heard, without intending to, the way you hear things in a large room when they happen to come through a gap in the noise. "That's Conrad Hale at the center table. Do you know who that is?" The other man turned in his chair. "Hale. Cornerstone Group. The one that took the majority position in Aldridge when it was acquired. He owns." Kellerman paused to consider the right word. "Well, he owns quite a lot of what's in this room." The other man's head did not move, but something in his posture did. Kellerman continued, lower now but not low enough. "He was here, years ago. Junior level. Aldridge let him go." The silence that followed was of the specific variety that happens when people at nearby tables stop their conversations without intending to. Cecily was at the far edge of the room when the shift happened. She felt it before she identified it, the way a temperature drop registers before a person thinks to look for clouds. She had learned to read rooms the way her father had taught her, as collections of attention with currents that could be tracked if you knew where to look. She looked. The shift was coming from the center section. She moved toward it without thinking, touching Preston's arm briefly as she passed to signal that she was managing something, and he nodded without asking. He had learned over the years that when Cecily moved through a room with that particular expression, it was not the moment to ask questions. She was close enough to see the table before she saw the face. The face stopped her. He was seated with the easy self-possession of someone who had never once needed to claim a room in order to belong to it, his jacket the kind of dark that does not call attention to itself, his expression the same expression she had last seen 11 years ago in the lobby of her father's building, attentive, unhurried, and completely without performance. For a moment she did not move. Then someone at the table beside him, she recognized Robert Kellerman only dimly, from some board function she had attended, said something to the man beside him, and she caught the name. Her father's firm's name, and then her own name, Aldridge, connected to the word acquired, connected to the word majority, connected to the man in the dark jacket at the center table. and the connections did not assemble into anything she could hold. Conrad saw her. He did not change expression. He did not stand. He simply looked at her the way a man looks at a thing he has been expecting without knowing exactly what shape it would arrive in, and he waited. Cecily crossed the room. She was aware of her dress, of her posture, of the eyes that were beginning to track her movement, and she understood, somewhere, in the part of her that had been managing rooms since she was 12 years old, that the carefully organized evening had stopped running according to her plan. "Conrad," she said. Her voice came out more measured than she felt. "Cecily," he said. He did not stand. He had not been invited to stand. "I didn't expect," she stopped. The sentence had nowhere honest to go. "You sent the invitation," he said. "I came." She looked at him for a moment. The room around them had achieved the particular quality of silence that occurs when a large number of people are pretending not to listen. "You could have replied," she said. "You didn't include a reply card." Preston appeared at her shoulder. He had crossed the room in the way of a man who has noticed something without being told to notice it. He was taller than Conrad by an inch, and he carried the inch with the reflexive confidence of a man who had always been the one people looked to when they arrived somewhere. He looked at Conrad and said, with the practiced evenness of a man who is asking a question he already knows the shape of, "I'm Preston Ware, and you are?" "Conrad Hale," Conrad said. The name moved across Preston's face in a way he did not try to stop quickly enough. He had heard the name before. He had heard it attached to the story his wife had told, the story with the known ending, the ending where the man had stayed exactly where the story left him. A woman at the next table. She was in her 60s, and her husband had stiffened at the name the way men stiffen when they are trying not to, leaned slightly toward her companion, and said in a voice not quite calibrated to the room, "Hale, from Cornerstone. He's the one who, isn't he? The acquisition. 3 years ago." Her companion said quietly, "4 states. Yes." The murmur moved. Conrad did not watch it move. He was looking at Cecily. She had gone through several expressions in rapid sequence and arrived at the one she used when she needed more time than she had. He recognized it. He had seen it once before in a lobby 11 years ago. "Conrad." Her voice had changed register. Not softer, smaller. "I didn't know you would actually. You wrote the note, Cecily." His voice was the same voice it had been. Even, unhurried. The voice of a man who has rehearsed nothing because he has been carrying the true version long enough that it does not need rehearsal. "You chose the words. You asked me to come and see what I walked away from, so I came. And I'm going to tell you, in front of the same room you thought I'd be diminished by, what you got wrong." Preston had taken a half step to the side without appearing to be aware of it. 11 years ago, Conrad said, your father called me into his office and told me I wasn't suited for the direction the firm was moving, that I was too careful, too slow, that the industry didn't have patience for a man who thought before he acted. He paused. "You were in the lobby. You knew the meeting was happening. You knew what it was, and you didn't tell me." Cecily opened her mouth. "I'm not angry about it," Conrad said. "I want you to hear that clearly, because I know the version of this conversation that's easiest for you is the one where I am. I'm not. I stopped being angry about it a long time ago. I left that office, and I went home and I started building. Not to prove you wrong, not to prove your father wrong. Those stopped being interesting reasons very quickly." He looked at her with the particular attention of someone who is saying something they have said to themselves many times in private, and are now saying out loud for the first and last time. "I built because I needed to know whether the judgment was right or whether it was just comfortable." "It was comfortable, Cecily. That's all it was. A comfortable judgment made by people who had stopped asking real questions about real things." Walter Aldridge, who had been moving through the room toward the commotion in the way of a man who believed any commotion involving his name required his presence, stopped near the edge of the center section. He had recognized Conrad approximately 4 seconds ago. His face had not changed, but something below it had. "The firm your father spent 40 years building," Conrad said, "was acquired 3 years ago. The majority position in the acquiring entity belongs to Cornerstone Group. Cornerstone Group is mine. I want to be straightforward about that because I have no interest in the version of tonight where it comes out later and becomes something it isn't. Your father built a good firm. I don't say that as a concession. I say it because it's true, and because the people who work in it now still work in it now, And because I am not the man either of you decided I was in that lobby 11 years ago." He reached into his jacket pocket and took out the small green cloth notebook. He did not open it. He held it in both hands the way a man holds a thing he has stopped needing to explain. "There is one thing I should have said when I walked out of that building," he said. "I've had it in this notebook for 11 years. The sentence is, I was not wrong about myself. I was just early." He put the notebook back in his pocket. "That's all I came to say." He looked at Cecily for a moment longer, not with anger, not with triumph, with the calm, clear finality of a man who has set something down on a table and is no longer picking it up. "Enjoy the evening." He stood. He put on his jacket with the unhurried ease of a man who has somewhere else to be and no urgency about getting there. He said good evening to the table in the general direction of the room, and he walked toward the door. The room did not speak for a long moment after the door closed. Walter Aldridge stood near the edge of the center section and did not look at his daughter. He looked at the door through which Conrad had just walked, and his expression was the expression of a man who has spent 40 years believing his own judgment absolutely and has just encountered the specific kind of evidence that does not argue with judgment, but simply makes it irrelevant. Preston Ware looked at his wife. He did not ask the question out loud. He had been a lawyer long enough to know which questions needed to be asked and which ones already had their answers standing in the room. He looked at her for a moment, and then he looked away, and Cecily understood from the direction of his gaze that the evening she had organized so carefully had been replaced by a different evening, one with a different agenda, one that was going to run much longer than the printed program. She stood in the center of the room in the gown she had chosen 6 weeks ago. Around her, the conversation slowly, carefully, with the self-consciousness of 400 people who had all just witnessed the same thing, and were none of them quite sure what to do with it, began to resume. It was not the same conversation as before. She could hear that. The register had changed. The name Cornerstone moved through the room on a low current, and with it the name Hale, and beneath both names the shape of a story she had told for 11 years, that the evening had just quietly, without raising its voice, corrected. Her father touched her arm. She looked at him. He did not say anything for a moment. He was 70 years old, and he had built a career on the certainty of his own assessments, and she could see on his face the particular discomfort of a man who has realized, too late for the kind of course correction that would have made a difference, that one of his assessments had been wrong. "I should go back up," he said finally. His voice was the voice of a man talking about the podium, about the program, about the evening that was still technically his. The remarks, "Yes," Cecily said. He moved away from her. She watched his back until the crowd rearranged itself around him. Preston came to stand beside her. Not close. Beside her. "Is any of it inaccurate?" he asked quietly. She did not answer right away. "Preston, the note. Did you write it?" The room was still moving around them. Someone had restarted the background music and glasses were being lifted and the young man with the clipboard was directing a late arrival, and all of it was happening at a distance that seemed greater than it was. "I wrote it," she said. He nodded once, slowly, the nod of a man who has just received confirmation of something he hoped he was wrong about. "We'll talk tonight," he said, and then he moved away from her, not toward anyone in particular, just away, which was, she understood, the only honest direction available to him. Cecily stood alone at the center of the room her father had spent 40 years building, and she had spent 3 months organizing, and she looked at the door. Conrad Hale was already gone. He was 20 minutes outside the city by the time the program resumed. Tom Briggs was driving, which he had offered to do without being asked, and Conrad sat in the passenger seat with the green notebook in his lap, not open, just held, the way you hold something you no longer need to read because you have already said it. They drove for a while without talking. "One stop," Conrad said eventually. Tom did not ask where. He had been with Conrad long enough to know that the sentence would finish itself. "There's a place that opened on Mercer, the one with the blue door. I've been meaning to try it for 2 years. Dinner," Tom said. "Dinner," Conrad agreed. He put the notebook in his jacket pocket and looked out at the road. The city fell away behind them, and the highway opened up, and Conrad Hale, who had spent 11 years building something out of a Tuesday afternoon he had never spoken of to anyone, sat in the passenger seat of a car and thought about what he wanted to eat, and then thought about that, and then stopped thinking about Cecily Aldridge entirely, the way you stop thinking about a door once you have finished walking through it. 11 years was a long time to carry a sentence. It had not weighed anything at all on the way home. Back in the event space, the program resumed. Walter Aldridge returned to the podium and delivered the remarks that had been prepared for him, and the room applauded at the right moments, and the photographs were taken, and the evening moved through its remaining hours with the forward momentum of events that have already happened. Cecily sat through the rest of it at her assigned table. She said the things that were required of her. She smiled when the camera turned her way. She did not give her planned toast. She told the young man with the clipboard that she had decided to keep it brief. Preston did not ask her about it on the drive home. The conversation he had promised was waiting for them in the house they had shared for 9 years, and she already knew, in the way a person knows before a door opens, the shape the room on the other side was going to have. She sat with that knowledge in the passenger seat the same way she imagined Conrad had sat in whatever car had taken him away from the evening she had built. Quietly, without argument, facing the direction that the choices she had made were pointing. She had spent 11 years telling a story about a man who hadn't been enough for the life she'd planned. The man had walked into her father's retirement gala, said one sentence, and walked back out. The story had not survived the evening. What she was going to do with the truth that replaced it was something she would have to work out on her own. Starting tonight, in a house that felt, for the first time in a long time, like it was waiting to find out who was actually living in it.